We're going to review using the zero product property to solve an equation that includes a polynomial. We talked about in class, the zero product property tells us that any number, when you multiply any number by zero, you get zero as your solution. And we're going to use that property in solving these equations by setting each factor to zero. We know that 5x is a factor and 4x minus 1 is a factor. So we set 5x equal to 0 and 4x minus 1 equal to 0. And then we just solve the equations that we have here. This is something that we've started doing early in the year. We end up with x equals 0 for this one. And x equals 1/4 for this one. Now we know that to check our work, we just substitute in our solution. And for the first factor, our solution is x equals 0. So I know that 5 times 0 times 4 times 0 minus 1 equals 0. And 5 times 0 is 0. And I know that 0 times anything is 0. So I end up with that being a correct solution. Okay? And I always write my solutions in brackets. And let's check the other example, the other solution. So I have 5 times 1/4 multiplied by 4 times 1/4 minus 1 equals 0. And I know that 4 times 1/4 is 1. And 1 minus 1 is 0. So I don't need to multiply 5 times 1/4 because I already know that 0 times anything is 0. And when I get a true statement, I know that my solution is correct. So the two possible solutions to this equation are 0 and 1/4. Let's try another example. We again have two factors, x plus 5. We set that to equal to 0, and 3x minus 10 equal to 0. Okay? Minus 5. So x equals -5. 3x equals 10. Divide by 3 and we get x equals 10/3. Okay? So then I put my solution up here in brackets, and it's -5 and 10/3. Remember, when we solve equations with fractions, we don't write the fractions as decimals, we leave them in fractional form. And you can check these solutions and find that you will find that the solutions are correct. Because of time, we're going to move on. If you want to check them at home, you can stop the video and check them now. All right, now we're going to add in factoring before applying the zero product property. As we've said in class, you have to recognize when you need to factor. And we can see that there's a common factor for the two terms 5x squared and 30x. And we know that the greatest common factor for 5 and 30 is going to be 5, and the greatest common factor for x squared and x would be x. So our greatest common factor then is 5x. We pull that out front, okay, and then we divide each of the terms by the greatest common factor. 5x squared divided by 5x gives me x. 30x divided by 5x gives me 6. So I end up with an equation that says 5x times the quantity of x plus 6 equals 0. And what we just learned on the previous page, we need to set both of our factors to 0. So I have 5x equals 0, and I have x plus 6 equals 0. I solve for x, and I end up with x equals 5, and x equals negative 6. So I put my solution in brackets, and my two possible solutions are negative 6 and 5. And again, you should be checking your work when you do these problems on your own. You would substitute in negative 6 for x and solve, and then and 5 for x and solve. Okay, let's try this next example. I have 18x squared and minus 27x equals 0. The greatest common factor for 18 and 27 is 9, and the greatest common factor for x squared and x is x, so my greatest common factor is 9x. I pull that out front, and then I divide each of the terms by 9x. 18x squared divided by 9x gives me 2x, and 27x divided by 9x gives me 3. So I end up with an equation with two factors. 9x times the quantity of x, 2x minus 3 is equal to 0. I need to set each of my factors equal to 0. So I have 9x equals 0 and 2x minus 3 equals 0. I solve for x. I end up with x equals 0. And x equals 3 over 2. I put that in brackets, and I end up with 0 and 3/2 as my two possible solutions. And again, I recommend that you check each of your solutions to be sure that you've worked out the problem correctly. Now, the last example here looks a little bit different. We have x squared equals negative 4x. The difference between that equation and the other two equations that we solved is that we don't have any of them equal, we don't have it equal to 0. So to solve that, to get our equation to equal to 0, I'm going to add 4x to both sides, and I end up with x squared plus 4x equals 0. Now this looks exactly like the problems that we've solved. And I'm going to find the greatest common factor of x squared and 4x, and that would be x. So I pull x out front, and then I divide each of the terms by x, and I end up with x plus 4. So my equation then is x times the quantity of x plus 4 equals 0. I set each factor equal to 0. I end up with x is equal to 0, and x is equal to negative 4. Okay? I'm going to put those solutions into brackets, and my two possible solutions are negative 4 and 0. And again, I can check by substituting in my two solutions for the variable and solving, and if I end up with a true statement, I have solved it correctly. So we have then learned how to use the zero product property and factoring to solve equations involving polynomials. You should have extra examples in your textbook, and there are solutions for some of those problems in the back of the book. This skill requires practice. So if you're not sure, and you've done your homework assignments, do some extra problems or come see me at lunch.